All right. Welcome back. This is the Front Row Podcast with Coach Mark Gottfried. And today I've got another guy who had an amazing career coaching, accomplished so many wonderful things, had such success at a lot of different schools, most notably at UCLA. And we're gonna dive into all of that a little bit. But Ben Howland, thank you for coming on the show, Ben. This will be fun.
It's great to be here, Mark. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. So, Ben, probably the first thing let's talk about, growing up in Santa Barbara, and, you end up going into coaching, and you just had an amazing run. You had a chance to start as an assistant, I think, at Gonzaga, and then, your career all through at Santa Barbara, obviously, and then you became a head coach. But for you, like, when was it, Ben, that you said, you know what, I think I want to coach? When I'm done playing, I want to dive in and be a coach. Was that early on?
It really was. I went to junior high in Santa Barbara, Galita Valley Junior High, and my best friend, this guy Tom DeMarcus, who I played basketball with in junior college and would have in high school at Dos Pueblos, had I not moved to Cerritos for my last 2.5 years of high school. Anyway, he told me he remembered in 7th grade, I'm telling him that, hey, I'm going to be a Division I basketball coach when I'm done playing. And so, and I was like, I was pretty focused on that, knew what I wanted to do right away. And it was an interesting thing for me to have to move. My dad was a pastor, Presbyterian minister, and we moved my sophomore year in high school from Santa Barbara, which is just the most beautiful place in the world, down to Cerritos, which was, suburbia L.A., between the 5, the 405, the 91, little different life, but it really worked out good for me. In fact, I played against Lorenzo Romar in high school and remember him up at Cerritos College. A lot of relationships that I got in those 2.5, 3 years in Cerritos ended up paying dividends for me as an assistant coach and then in coaching because I met so many more people being down in L.A. in the basketball world. So, that was fun, but I've always wanted to be a coach. Kind of knew what I was going to do early on. Didn't have any distractions. I wanted to play as long as I could, but I wasn't a great player. I ended up, playing at Weber State for Neil McCarthy, who was a great coach in his own right. My last 2 years, I was a JC transfer, so I went back from Cerritos High School. The day I graduated, I moved back to Santa Barbara and went to Santa Barbara City College, where my heroes that I grew up with all, ended up playing there for 2 years before they went and did, their Division I or Division II thing, whatever they ended up doing. I played for a really good coach, Ed DeLacy there, who taught passing game. And here in Southern California, passing game in the 70s was really a big deal, and it's amazing how it's come back now. Like the NBA is all spaced out passing game, and not a lot of movement of the ball, a lot of cutting, and it really was something that we learned how to play. Way back when there was a number of good coaches that taught it really well.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple, and for me, I go back. Obviously, I played for great coach and Wimp Sanderson at Alabama. Then, I was with Jim Harrick for 7 years, and those guys helped, shape me, along with my dad and my Uncle Mike, who was a football coach. But I was around coaching, but the guys that probably maybe shaped you a little bit, shaped your career, where you said, we all kind of pick and choose from different guys. Right. Okay, I like this about this, but some of the guys that you would say maybe your mentors, the guys that helped you out along the way.
Well, I would say as a young coach, obviously it was Jerry Pym. I mean, I was an assistant coach at age 23 at UCSB. I had spent the 1 year at Gonzaga, and it was a great thrill for me. Jay Hillock, who had been Ed DeLacy's assistant coach, who I've known since I'm 10 years old. Jay was the head coach at Gonzaga. Dan Fitzgerald bumped himself up to being just the AD to really try to get the athletic department. It's funny, Gonzaga is such an unbelievable, great program and story, but early on they were just surviving, trying to make it. And so anyway, I was up there for 1 year, and that was a great experience, because we played against George Raveling, and we played Mike Montgomery's Montana team, and a number of really good teams that year. But I got to go against John Stockton every day in practice because our backup point guard quit in October to come back down to Barstow. It was just too far away from home for him. and someone had to run the second team, and so I was out there going against Johnny every day, which was, unbelievable. It was all in the half court because our game at Gonzaga at the time was very much half court, so I didn't have to chase him around. I just foul him all practice. But then when I went to Santa Barbara, Jerry had been the coach at Utah when I played at Weber, and so he knew of me just from that. And I was really lucky that he retained me. I went to Santa Barbara and coached 1 year for Coach DeLacy, who had moved from City College over to UCSB. And I was retained by Jerry, fortunately. And I really learned a lot from Jerry because, he's an SC guy. He grew up here in Southern California, recruited down here his whole career when he was an assistant for Jack Gardner, who was a great coach, and he worked at Utah. And then he worked for Bill Foster for a couple years there. So he had some really good people that he had worked for. But he taught me a lot, not just about the game, but also how to run a program.
Right.
And all the things that people don't realize the head coach has to do outside of just being on the floor, of being with the kids, and being with your staff. There's so many other aspects. The fundraising part and, working with boosters and trying to help raise money for your program and dealing with the media. And, Jerry was very good in all those areas, I thought. But, the guy that I really learned a ton from basketball-wise as well was Rick Majerus. I got a chance to know Rick through Jay Hillock, and I almost went to work for him at Utah, but we became best friends, and he really took me under his wing. He was so good to me, so nice to me. I would just go watch their practices, and anybody knew anything about Majerus, his whole life was basketball. It was just tunnel vision. Basketball or food. That was it. No in-betweens. In fact, we were talking earlier off the air. You told me you had George Carl on recently. He and George are really tight and, could just sit there and talk basketball for 8 hours. So I spent a lot of time with him, both watching their practices, watching film, as well as just, really spending time. I worked his camps. Me and Jamie Dixon were counselors at his basketball camp at Utah when I was the head coach at Northern Arizona, and Jamie was my assistant there.
Wow.
Just to get on the inside. And they had that camp going where they had the best players in the country all coming so you could see them and work with them. And, they had some real players. I remember Richard Jefferson was in that camp. He was really good. But Majerus taught me a ton. And he was really smart. I'll give you an interesting aspect to him. He had been like a zone coach and worked for Al McGuire. They won the national championship at Marquette when he was an assistant. And he ended up getting the Marquette job, and he was playing zone mostly the 3 years he was head coach. And then, partying the ways, he went work for Don Nelson for a year, and then he was the Ball State coach. And he scheduled his practices at Ball State so every day he could drive to Indiana, University of Indiana, and watch Bobby Knight teams practice. So he watched that team practice for 2 straight years. Every practice, Coach Knight let him in. And he really took a lot from him. So, coaches all steal from each other. And, I thought Tarkanian was fantastic when I was in the Big West, how hard their teams played and how they competed, how good they were. I really love some of the things he did. But we're all trying to do that as coaches. And then you have your own self that you imprint upon it as well.
Let me share this story, and I want your reaction. I want you to see how you feel about this one. I've shared this a couple times on the show, but when I was an assistant at UCLA with Jim Harrick, we're at Cal, going to shoot around, 11 o'clock in the morning, going over to the gym, going to do a little walkthrough, and I climb up in the front seat there, and I'm sitting with Jim, and I looked at him. I said, what's the biggest difference between being an assistant coach and head coach? And I was anticipating this big, elaborate, long answer. I thought it was going to be great, And he just kind of turned a little bit to the left. He looked at me and he said, lonely. And I was a little bit like, okay. And, I was probably 24 years old at the time. But then, later when I became a head coach and then, along my career, I remembered at times where you feel like, as an assistant, it's one thing. But then when you're the head coach, that it's just you. It's nobody else. And you got to make a decision. And you had such a great run, at all the stops you had along the way. And but can you relate to that a little bit? That little bit of that comment that Jim Harrick, that wise wisdom, just lonely. That was his only word.
Well, he was really good to me when I was at UCLA, and I reached out to him immediately and sat with him. We went and had lunch at a hotel where I was staying when I first got the job. Couldn't have been nicer. Just really, I'd known him and respected him for so long. When he was at Pepperdine, I was at UCSB as an assistant. We had real wars with some of those teams that he had coached. And then, he'd gone on to UCLA and won the national championship. I mean, you obviously and Lorenzo and Steve Lavin were the staff at that time, and just an incredible team and program. It was just really special to watch. As a UCLA fan, I grew up a UCLA fan as a little kid. But I learned a lot from Jim, too, and very, very smart, very intelligent. But when you're a head coach, there's no question. You feel it, every little thing. I mean, and you can relate to this, I know. The toughest thing for me as a head coach was the day of the game prior to when the game started. Just all that anxiety and angst. I mean, I laugh talking to other coaches about it, and it really, it's just so painful.
I hated it.
Oh, the worst.
Like for a 7 o'clock game, it's like from 2 to 5. It's like, this is terrible.
When I went to the Big East from Northern Arizona, we're starting to play. First time ever playing, 12 noon games at 1 o'clock. I love those because you just got up and you played the game, and there wasn't that 7 hours of just, like slowly dying. And then as soon as the game starts, boom, you're good. As soon as the game starts, everything falls away, and you're into doing your job and doing everything you can to help your kids win. But to me, you talk about being lonely. You're sitting there in that room by yourself thinking about the game and what's coming up. And we did it, 1,000 times. I mean, and every game is so big, so important, as you know. I mean, when you're I don't know how these NBA guys do it. You have to have a different mindset, I guess. Think about it. Doing 82 games, plus the playoffs, that's unbelievable.
Preseason as well.
Oh. I mean, to me, that's like the toughest part to that stuff right there.
So you're coaching. I'm going to jump ahead. So
Okay.
From Northern Arizona to Pittsburgh, had an unbelievable run at Pitt, and then the opportunity comes to come to UCLA. So you're a product of Southern California. You've grown up around watching the goods, the highs of UCLA, but then some lows too. There was both, obviously, with Coach Wooden and the run they had, and then after that, and all the way through all the guys that coached, and but walking into UCLA, it's an interesting thing because it is one of the great programs of all college basketball of all time, but it's a different place. I try to describe it to people. Sometimes it's kind of hard, but for you, tell me what that was like. That day when it's coming together and boom, it's happening. You're now at UCLA.
But I had it made at Pitt. I mean, I had the greatest chancellor you could ever have, Mark Nordenberg. My AD had just left to go to Nebraska, back where he's from, so there was a little, uncertainty as to who was going to be. And if he had stayed, I never would have taken the UCLA job because he wouldn't have allowed it. I mean, he would have, and I had felt loyal to him because he hired me from Northern Arizona to come to the University of Pittsburgh, which is just such an odd move if you talk to people in the business. It's, I'm not from the East. I didn't know anybody. I was just really lucky that, that occurred for me. But the dream was always UCLA. I mean, as a young assistant coach, that was the pinnacle, and I watched every one of those replays, on Channel 5 at night. It was phenomenal, as a kid growing up. You never saw the team lose. I mean, we saw a lot of undefeated seasons, 4 in total. I mean, it was incredible. But there's no question the expectation level at UCLA is what's so unique. I mean, you're expected to be vying for the national championship on a yearly basis. And, the question is, how do you do that? And, a lot of people have, shied away from that kind of expectation, but I tried to embrace it. My mom and dad were in Santa Barbara, and I wanted to be closer to family when I had that opportunity. Pittsburgh's a long way away from where they were, and you know, it was tough for me because actually, as it worked out, when I first got the job, my dad died 6 weeks later. So it was actually a blessing in disguise because I was there to, you know, be around my mom and be closer to family. But yeah, I remember the press conference very well, the very first day. UCLA has this incredible image, but yet, you know, we're having this press conference up on a kind of a makeshift thing where I'm trying to sit up there and not fall off because there's not enough room on the stage there in the room that, you know, they do it. I forget what the room's called in the back there down below where the Hall of Fame is for all the different athletics in the right there where all the coaches work. But, you know, it was like, you know, I had about this much room, Mark, where I was going to fall off. I said, that'd make a really good splash.
Right off the back.
Right off the back. I'm telling you, it was wild. But, I mean, it was a big deal. Yeah. You know, Al Carnesol was the president or chancellor, and Dan Guerrero was the one that hired me, and I was very grateful to both of them for the opportunity. That's what, you know, I wanted to learn from Jim. He says, it's the best job and it's the worst job at the same time, Ben. And I go, what? And, you know, he went into the whole thing, and, you know, you lived it.
Yeah.
And, you know, the expectations are so high.
It's interesting to me because, you know, it's been such a long time ago for Coach Wooden. But I used to say this. I might have said this to you. I think you and I had I think we ate lunch in Indianapolis one year during the summer recruiting. But I know I told this to Steve Alford later. But I think I told it to you too. But I used to say, you know, like those first 28 games we play in the regular season, those are all exhibition games.
Right.
Because really, your season begins in March. There. And even for fans, because, you know, I'm coaching at NC State, and we've got 19,000 at games, you know. We're filling up a NBA-style arena. But at UCLA, it's different, you know. You can fill it at times, and people get excited. But in LA, there's so many things going on. People have so many other interests in the weather and Hollywood and celebrities and, you know, the beach. And, you know, it goes on forever and ever. But the expectation is still there. And it's really it's an interesting thing. You know, it's kind of hard to put your thumb on it, you know, where Kentucky and Indiana and UConn now and North Carolina, Duke, you know, there's a rabid fan base. But UCLA, it's not really. It is, but it isn't. Would you agree? Am I kind of?
Yeah, no, I because there's so many other things to choose from, and especially, you know, when Wooden was there, you know, the Lakers hadn't really hit their stride yet. They had just come out from Minnesota, and, you know, they were there, but, you know, they hadn't won a championship in LA yet. They weren't the deal yet, and they didn't have the facility. The Forum wasn't even built yet. I mean, now it's so much more difficult, I think, for SC and UCLA with the Lakers and the Clippers, and now the money behind it with these unbelievable facilities, you know, the attraction to, you know, get the best players in the world to come play here. Same thing with football with the Rams and the Chargers. It's just much more difficult when you're competing for that entertainment dollar. Where, you know, at Alabama, I mean, I was at Mississippi State. I mean, you know, those that's the only show in town, in the state. Yeah. Not just, you know, there locally, but in the state. Everybody from the state, you know, at Alabama, for example, in football, is coming to the game. I mean, that's huge. It's so much of a bigger deal in other places because there's so much less to choose from. It's everything. LSU football, I mean, the SEC blew me away in terms of the fan bases supporting their programs. And I know, like, we had the SC-UCLA rivalry, and you wanted to beat them more than anybody except maybe Arizona in basketball in our league because it's a huge deal for the fans. Right. But like Mississippi, it's 365 days a year. They hate Ole Miss at Mississippi State. At Alabama and at Auburn, they hate each other's
every
guts.
day of the year.
Every day of the year. And I mean, like those Auburn fans, like it's unbelievable. They're fighting that uphill climb to try to be, you know, what Alabama's been. But you don't have that in the West, and that in some ways does really hurt us. I just tell you this, and we talked about this, you know, when I saw you at the Dodger game. I've seen you a lot. The Pac-12 going under. You know, having been at UCLA, I mean, and a kid growing up in Southern California, and I love the Pac-8, the Pac-10, the Pac-12. To see it go under is just so sad and hurts so much for all of us that were involved, because it was such a great league and it was so special, and it was the West. Yeah. So I mean, you know,
best of the West.
Yeah,
the best
by far.
And the way the Pac, you know, I was there in the Pac-10 and that became the Pac-12. But the way it was set up too, where you had Arizona State, Oregon State, Washington State, Cal and Stanford, you know, UCLA. So every time you'd go to Oregon, you'd play 2 and come home. You know, the way it was set up was so unique.
It was the right way, though, for kids. I mean,
Yes.
think about the travel now and how hard it is. I know I'm digressing, but, you know, we're talking about UCLA and what they have to contend with now. I mean, you know, Mick Cronin's going to be flying, you know, 30, 40,000 miles, just like they did, you know, in Stanford volleyball this year and UCLA football. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And I hope someday that it gets rectified in some way. But I understand that, you know, they had to do it because of financial reasons.
Yeah. It was such a great league, and it breaks my heart too. Hey, everyone, if you're enjoying the content on this podcast, I would encourage you to hit the like and the subscribe buttons. Your involvement in this show allows me to continue to bring you amazing, high-achieving guests. Thank you so much for your support. You know, Ben, when you were at UCLA, and we'll talk about Pitt and Mississippi State and all of them, but, you know, when you were there, too, you had such an amazing run. I mean, you really did. And anywhere else in the world, the run you had is celebrated, you know, off the charts forever. You know, but because it's UCLA and John Wooden and 10 national championships out of 12 years, what he did. But the run that you had was it's going to be hard for somebody to match it. You know, you got to win it, obviously, and that's what you want. But, you know, you had that little stretch with the 3 Final Fours, 2 national championship games. I mean, you're knocking on the door. You're right there. And talk about that little period you had at UCLA, because that was special.
It really was. And, you know, the key always is really good players. And we were very fortunate when I first arrived to be received by, you know, some of the best players in Southern California. Aaron Aflalo was my first recruit, and he was a huge part of why we went to back-to-back Finals Fours in his last 2 years. He was there 3. You know, great leader, unbelievable kid, outstanding player, 12-year pro, made over $80 million in the NBA, really good. And then Jordan Farmar was the next commit. So I was like, this is pretty fun. This is pretty good here. I got, you know, 2 NBA players come in at my 1 and my 2 my first year, but it's going to be easy. But obviously that wasn't true. But it was really good. And we got very fortunate. I mean, getting Ba Mute, who was really under-recruited.
He was.
Very much under-recruited. You know, it was funny, and we just were very fortunate. It was us, South Carolina, and I forget one other team, and, you know, UCLA and California really. And we got lucky on Alfred Aboya, who was another, you know, real big part of all those teams. You know, Lorenzo Mata, you know, was incredible in terms of recruiting him locally. Not a big-time recruit. He wasn't on everybody's list. But we had a bunch of, you know, guys that really loved to work hard, that were coachable, that loved UCLA. I mean, those guys still go to the UCLA games right now and just love it. I mean, they're so proud. The pride, like you and I were both there in March at the last home game of the Pac-12. In the history of the Pac-12 between Arizona State and UCLA. And they invited back all the former players. Doug Erickson did a great job putting that whole thing together. Really well planned and well done. It was really special. And there aren't many programs that have that, you know. And what Coach Wooden did will never be done again. I mean, you know, you had Bill Walton and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar were in college for 4 years. I mean, you know, that will never happen again. A player of that kind of caliber could stay. You know, Jamal Wilkes. I mean, you think about all the guys that they had that came through there, but had them for 4 years. It was really a unique time, and it was different. I mean, the tournament. I think when they first won it was 16 teams, maybe. I mean, it was and you only one team out of your league went.
That's it.
And that was serious pressure. You got to win your league, or you never get like USC. I think one year they finished second in the country to UCLA in the polls, but didn't go to the tournament.
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah, how about that?
Crazy. How about this one, Ben? So right when I get there, I'm a graduate assistant, 88. You would have been at Santa Barbara because that's when we first started crossing paths when you were an assistant there. But I remember Coach Wooden turned 80 that year, my first year. And so they had a birthday party for him out at the Sportsman's Lodge in Sherman Oaks area there. And so I go, and I'm young, and I'm excited, and I walk in this room, and I walk in. When you get to be 80, I guess people start thinking, well, we got to go to the birthday party because you don't know how many more they're going to be, Well, I walk in this room, it's Kareem, Walton, Wilkes, Mike Warren, it's David Myers, it's Richard Washington, Sidney Witt. I mean, they're all there. The list goes on and on and on. Dick Enberg standing over there that did the radio. And I walk in this room, and I'm looking around like, good grief, there's some dudes in here. There's some players in here, like great players. And then obviously you had great players, but for you too, just that, growing up in Southern California and the number of guys that were amazingly great at basketball had to be kind of cool for you, even as you became the coach and you really got to know those guys a whole lot better throughout the year.
10% of the NBA comes from California. I mean, California has produced a lot of great players over the years, and UCLA recruiting-wise, still more than anything, you got to get your kids from California. I mean, you guys won the national championship. The bulk of those guys were California kids, and they did a phenomenal job at that. And the appeal, they had really top-notch, not only basketball players but great kids. I mean, really sharp, and it was a joy to meet all those guys and get to know them and the pride. Like Mike Warren is just like the best. The best. I mean, he really is. He's such a good man and a good person and so supportive and loves UCLA, the gymnastics, it loves everything about it. Keith Erickson, what a great guy. What a good person. I mean, just phenomenal. So many, Jamal was a hero of mine growing up because he played his senior year at Santa Barbara High School. So I knew him, as a high school, player, watching him, didn't know him as a person, but his dad was a minister, my dad was a minister. I mean, he was really an idol of mine as a kid growing up. So for me, it's like, now you're the coach of the place where you idolized all these great players, and that was really, really special for me. And getting the relationship with Coach. The very first day, on that day that I got the job, we headed later in the day to fly down to New Orleans for the Final Four. And I met with Coach in his room down there, and I'll never forget that. It was the first time I sat with him, and just couldn't be more supportive, more nice. He supported every single coach after him.
He did.
And he would be very upset if any of his former players said derogatory things about those coaches in any way. And he let them know. I mean, he was like as classy as you could, possibly be as a former coach, and really, really loved the program. The one thing, we were talking about his 80th birthday. I was actually there and saw him the day that he passed away in the hospital. And, he was so nice to me and my family. And, the children's book that he wrote, he inscribed for my kids. We still have those. But I'll never forget, he's sitting there laying down. He hadn't been shaved in days because he's been in the hospital. And so he's got this little beard growing. And he looks up at me and he says, you see this right here? This kind of reminds me of Bill Walton. and he cracks up a smile. And later in the day, he passed away. It was just like this guy, he was incredible. And I'll never forget how special this was. This is one of the most touching things for me about Coach, was that I had his grandson, his great-grandson, Tyler Trapani, as a walk-on at UCLA. And we were getting ready to play the last game in Pauley Pavilion, the old Pauley that Coach helped create. we're beating Arizona, our arch rival, and beat them really good that day by 20 or 30 points. And so he gets to get in the end of the game. He made the last basket in the history of the old Pauley Pavilion.
Wow.
And for me, Coach had already passed away. For me, that was so special.
Wow.
That was so incredible. Wow. I was really touched. I mean, it brought me to tears just to think about that, how proud he would have been to have his blood there, make that last little basket. And that was really, really incredible.
I tell people all the time, Ben, I don't know that I've ever met somebody that was as generous of their time, as gracious, kind, wise, all kind of wrapped up into one as John Wooden was. And I had those moments where I'd sit on his couch and we'd just sit there talking. I lived in Calabasas, so I'd have to drive out to 101. This was before cell phones, so sometimes I'd call from that itty-bitty little locker room we had. The coaches, they might have upgraded it when you were there, but when I was there was a tiny, we couldn't all even partly fit in there, but I'd get on the phone and call him and say, Coach, would you mind if I just stopped by for a second? And he'd say, every single time, absolutely. He would want me to come and just sit and talk, and we'd talk about Bob Newhart's show, or we'd talk about life, or integrity, or leadership, or all these things. It was unbelievable. But I've never been around, for me, somebody that's all of those things wrapped up into one. And you're the head coach there, so I know you're experiencing that as well.
It was incredibly special to get to know him. I mean, what a blessing! What a just unbelievable opportunity to learn from him and get to know him. I'll never forget how much he loved baseball. He explained to me he was a baseball guy. He loved it, and he coached baseball at the high school level before he got his first job as a college coach. And but he had a bunch of kids. He was in South Bend, Indiana, right where Notre Dame's at. And he had about 7 kids that were all Polish and had these long Polish last names. and so he's like 96 years old, and he rattles off every single starter on the team, and their names. I'm just going, this is unbelievable.
That's great.
But in his wallet, he kept an article that meant so much to him, that was from the Pittsburgh newspaper, that he was offered the managerial position of the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, and he was. And that was so special because he really wanted to do it. I mean, he loved it.
Oh, that's funny.
And I thought that was incredible. And he kept it on him at all times in his wallet.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it really is.
So many stories about him. And we were both, that was, like you said, what a blessing. Let me ask you this one, Ben, because in my view, and your coaches, we get it. So you look out there and you see other coaches, and even having been there at UCLA when I was an assistant for the number of years, and now you're the head coach, and I'm saying to myself, what an amazing job! Like every year, and you hear people grumbling about style of play, blah blah blah, but at the end of the day, it just comes down to winning. I mean, you can tell me all you want. If I beat you 2-1, I still beat you. It doesn't matter. But you had such an amazing run, and I think I have this right. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. And I think you guys had won like 25 games or something. It was your last year.
Right.
You win the Pac-12. Was it 12 then or 10?
Pac-12.
Pac-12 championship.
Outright.
You're the winners.
Outright.
Championship winners of the league. You've had this amazing decade or so, and you've been in the Final Fours and national championship games, and you go to the tournament, and I can't remember who it was. Somebody beat you, but it happens to all of us. And they make the decision to make a change. I just remember, for me, sitting, I think it was at NC State, but I just remember going, what in the world? What in the world? What in the world is happening?
Yeah,
and it just blew me away.
It was very tough for me because I had a chance actually the year before to take a really good job in the Big Ten. That was a new start. But I had all these kids. I had Shabazz Muhammad, Kyle Anderson coming in. We had this kid Jordan Adams, who
really good player.
And I tell you what, that killed us because he broke his foot on the last play of the game in the semifinals when we beat Arizona for the 3rd time that year. Okay, we didn't just win the championship. We beat Arizona 3 times. I mean, they were really good. Sean really had it going. And, that changed our seeding because we lost one of our starters. We would have been in Utah, but they sent us out to Texas, and we ended up playing against Tubby in Minnesota, and they beat us in the first round. We were limping in there because he was great, Jordan, at the end. I mean, he was so good. We had Larry Drew that had an incredible senior year for us. He really didn't have the kind of year you'd expect at Carolina in any of his 3 years. His last year at UCLA, I mean, he was our best player. He was key. We had the Ware twins. I mean, we actually had, pro Norman Powell. We had guys who were really good players and coming back. So I thought, hey, well, no. I mean, we just won the regular season. Things happened. He broke his foot. I thought that, I was surprised in my heart because I thought it was the right thing to give me another year. But,
another year? How about another 3 or 4 or 5 years? I mean, it's amazing.
It is what it is. I mean, I will always be thankful for my time at UCLA. I love UCLA. I'm, rooting for him all the time.
Yeah.
Cronin's doing a great job.
Did you ever go through a period, Ben? Because I did, like at NC State, when the athletic director decided to make a change, and for a while.
Well, you'd already been to 4 Sweet 16s. Come on, Mark. I mean,
so I remember when
was it 4 or 5?
She called me in, and I was like blown away. But for a while, I was kind of grumpy at everything NC State. Like, it was just part of that. You're just human nature. You're like, mad, you're hurt, you're embarrassed. It's hard. People don't understand how hard it is, when those things happen. It's very public. You've poured your heart into it. I poured my heart into it. But then it took me a little time to realize, it's not like everybody. Like, there are a lot of people that would have agreed not to, make the change. It's really one person or 2 people or 3 people.
Right. That's
really it. So for me, it took me a while to get over it because I was mad at everything NC State, which was unfair. It just was unfair. Most people there didn't do it. They didn't do anything wrong to me, just a couple people. Did you ever experience some of that? Like because yours was a whole lot different to me, Ben. You'd done such a great job that there was no need for that, in my view, from my seat. That's the way I saw it. Everybody has some lulls. We all have them. Coaches have them. Things happen. Injuries happen. Transfers happen. Things happen. You might lose an assistant
even more so now than ever before.
All of that in the continuity and longevity of, giving, coaches time to kind of live through some of the valleys. Because you're the same guy that went to 3 Final Fours. You're the same guy. You didn't forget basketball. But did you have to? Was there that part of you, that kind of grumpy part, like at first? I know you're hurt. We're all hurt.
Like I had a chance to take a couple new jobs right away, and I was like, I need to step back here for myself after that happened. So the first year I was not going to coach. I was just going to take, and I ended up taking another year. But I also saw with Coach Harrick, you guys won the national championship, and then he's gone a year later. And let me tell you this, if that had happened at all the other schools you had mentioned, Carolina, Duke, they would have never made that change. Never. That's for sure. I know that in my heart.
I agree.
So, when you're the coach at UCLA, you understand the ramifications, and I understood that. So I didn't let it tear me down. It was great, and I'll always be thankful for the decade I spent in Westwood.
And the guy that, for me, always kind of helped me was Jim Harrick, because he used to always tell me, like, Mark, don't you dare let the person that made the decision, like, don't you dare let them steal a moment of your joy. Like, he was always so positive, even after, I got fired. Like, don't let anybody steal your joy, and it's, it's part of the game. It still hurts, but he was so good with that with me. It was just always trying to make sure that, you're not going to get down and you're not going to get grumpy. And even for him, I walked with him back into UCLA the first game that he went back after they had fired him. He didn't want to go back for a while. And I flew out to to Orange County. He was living in Dove Canyon. We drove up, and UCLA was playing Washington. Lorenzo was the coach at Washington, Lorenzo Romar, and so he didn't want to go at first, but then when he went, and I remember him and I walking into Pauley Pavilion, and the crowd just went crazy. They started cheering for him.
Right.
And I think it made him feel really good, and it kind of was able for, I think, from that forward. But, to still love and support UCLA, which he's done through
Yes, he has.
all the guys. And it's been a great example, for me, because there have been times for me, human nature is like, screw everybody, I'm mad at everybody. But he was always like, Mark, don't do that. Like, don't live that way. And you've been great with that, too, as far as UCLA. And, went on to coach at Mississippi State in the SEC, but you've always been that way, too. Very positive, publicly positive about UCLA. Whoever the coach is and however they play and whatever they do, you're still rooting for them.
I am, and I always will. I mean, I did since I was a kid. And, LA is different, too. When you're in a pro sports town like we are not, I use this example. So Pat Riley won 5 NBA championships, I think it is. One of the best 5 coaches in the history of the NBA. They kind of showed him the door with the Lakers. Phil Jackson, after the first 3 championships, all right, they kind of, he took some time, a couple years, but that wasn't discouraged by the Lakers. So, and I look at you're talking about the greatest NBA coach ever, period. To me, that's just like, it's wild, it's crazy. And that's a pro mentality. And the thing about the pros, different than college, when you get fired in the pros, it's no problem. You got another job waiting for you. Right. I mean, whatever you want. That's never an issue because they get it.
Yeah.
Where in college, you lose a job like you do, it's much harder.
Right.
At least I had a track record, with Northern Arizona and Pitt to be able to get back in at a high level. Yeah. But it's tough.
How about this one for you, Ben? So you're in LA, and you took a couple years, and then you end up in Starkville, Mississippi. Now I've been to Starkville many, many times, and a lot of people have never been there. But small town, passionate about their school and their teams. But you talk about going from a city the size of LA and Southern California, and greater Los Angeles, to what we call Stark Vegas. So here you are. Tell me about that one. How was that for you right at the beginning?
Well, what's interesting is my wife Kim went out, and I wanted her to see the town where we were going to be moving to. I had never been there. So the very first time I saw Starkville was when I took the job. I had never even been there. But I talked to plenty who had. And she kind of described it for me. It's a very small, you talk about small college town in eastern Mississippi. It's unbelievable. But there's such a passion and love from the fans and the alums that went to school there. But let me tell you this, football is really important.
You think?
In the SEC, in the South. So basketball is something you do between, football and baseball. It's not quite the same as UCLA in terms of the emphasis. And they had some great runs. Richard did a great job getting to the Final Four there, Richard Williams. But I had a great experience, and it was really 7 years that I spent there. It was really, the COVID thing made it really tough. We had a really good team. We had finished in the top 4 in our league and had a double bye in the tournament. And I remember crying in front of my team because they just told me, and I had to tell the team that we weren't going to be able to play the rest of the season. It was over. And that was brutal, that COVID thing that everybody had to deal with in so many ways. But for my team, that was just awful. But living in small town, in the deepest of the South was really interesting. My wife and I actually really loved the people. My wife, Kim's an unbelievable Christian woman. So for an unbelievable Christian woman, to be living somewhere, you talk about the experience of a lifetime. There's so much love and caring for others and for each other. And that was, to me, really, really special. And then you coach kids from a totally different area of the country who, in the South, the basketball is not a big deal either at the high school level. They're not like the fundamentals kids get in Southern California at a young age. They're learning how to jump stop and pivot and left hand, right hand. None of that's going on in Mississippi. I mean, you get a lot of raw talent, and then you're really teaching them the game that they don't get at a younger level in that state. And, Alabama is ahead. I mean, Mississippi is really, a rural place. I mean, you've got Jackson, and then everything else is just small towns throughout the entire state. But they love Mississippi State. They love Ole Miss, their fans. And that was really fun to be a part of that rivalry because it was intense.
So you coached, and including Northern Arizona, but in the Pac-12, in the Big East, and in the SEC. And so I'm very similar. I was in the SEC, the ACC, and then as an assistant, though, in the Pac-12, and then I was at Murray State, too. But as you compare those a little bit, they're all different. Pac-12, I think, is much different. The Big East, I think you got a lot of those city kids out of the Phillies and New Yorks and the Pittsburghs and, all those cities up there, a little bit different. In the South, maybe a lot more rural kids. I recruited a lot of kids that didn't have a whole lot, and you brought it in there. But talk about the differences in all of those kind of leagues for you, because you coached, you were exposed to a lot of different things.
It was a great experience. Starting with going from Northern Arizona to Pittsburgh, we led the country in three-point shooting percentage 3 years in a row at NAU. Northern Arizona. 3 years in a row, we led the country in three-point shooting. It was recruit to shoot. And I just, we had to find a niche that we could, hang our hat on. It was getting a bunch of shooters that could really stroke the ball, do your best on defense, and try to survive it. And we had success. Going to Pittsburgh, you had to play, different. Now you're in with a bunch of great athletes. So now it's recruiting a bunch of athletic guys that could really defend. And when I was in the Big East, they really allowed you to play a physical brand of basketball. And we were incredibly physical, but you're recruiting like I was going into homes in New York and the Bronx and Brooklyn. I mean, I'm talking about incredible slum conditions. But one time I was recruiting a kid who ended up going to a school in our league. They had a roof, and you could see the other apartment because there were holes in the ceiling right through where you could see the apartment above you. I mean, I had one kid who I signed who was a 3-time All-Big East player. I go to his house. They're in a cinder block, metal doors, so you can't be burned out of there. I'm the only white guy, that's in the area. They thought I was crazy going there by myself, and that's why I got the kid. He couldn't believe I came by myself in his neighborhood where he lived. And they had a pit bull in the bathroom. And I was like, I'd like to use the bathroom. Well, there are pit bulls in there. I said, well, hey, I'll be good. All right, I'm all right. But, you talk about some of the, experiences of recruiting. And I'll never forget this, that, in my third year, we're going out recruiting, and then the 9/11 happened. I was in New York City 2 days after that thing occurred, and the smell. We had players. Brandon Knight was a first-team All-American for me. His brother played at Stanford, was a great player, played for Coach Montgomery there. Brevin, a 15-year pro. And they lost, I think it was like 18 alums from their high school, Seton Hall Prep. And then Barry Rorson was my assistant, and he was at Severian High School. They lost. So, we had connections where people lost people that they knew that were alums at their high school or good friends. It was brutal. That was something that was really difficult to go through. And I'll never forget this, Mark. We're playing UConn for the Big East Championship in my third year. We had gone to the championship the year before. They had never been ever at Pitt to the championship of the Big East tournament, which was, tournaments, when I first thought about them, it's like, it's a way to make money for the league. The Big East tournament was the deal in the Big East. They didn't even care about the regular season nearly as much as bringing everybody to New York City together. That was such a huge happening. It was incredible. Media-wise, for the players, the fans, everybody. It was such a big deal. Madison Square Garden. And this fireman sang the national anthem prior to that game, and everybody was in tears. I mean, it was unbelievable. Double overtime loss to them, never hurt so bad. But, we had a chance to come back the next year and actually beat UConn in the championship game in the Garden. But that year was, really, really something to live with. I mean, you had Tranghese, who was our commissioner at the time. It was unbelievable, the emotion and the pride. There in New York City with the firemen and the policemen and all the first responders and, people all connected together. I mean, it was that really was a coming together. It was really special. And it hurt to see the Big East go down, as a league, because of the football thing. But it is what it is.
Everything seems to change. But, Ben, you've coached, man, you had such an amazing career and so much success. But if you look back in coaching, and sometimes we remember losses more than we remember wins because they hurt so bad. It's funny. Jim Farmer and I went to visit our college coach, Wimp Sanderson, and we sat there. We actually sat on his couch, or when we left, we went on the front porch and he cried. It was unbelievable, but we went and spent about 4 or 5 hours with him. But he still remembered the night we got beat by Providence in 1987. He just, I didn't have you guys ready. And we're like, Coach, it wasn't you, trust me. We were ready, but anyway, in coaching, Ben, when you look back at your run and all the things you've done, what were some of the most amazing parts of the coaching profession that you loved the most?
Well, number one, there's the relationships with the players. I mean, as a young assistant, recruiting them, getting to know them. And it's different now. You don't get to know them like you used to when we were assistant coaches and you recruited them for 2 years. I recruited Kevin Love for 4 years, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. I mean, a lot of time. And we had him for 9 months. It was the greatest 9 months of my life. He was so special. But, I mean, you just think about all the relationships that you build along the way. And then for me, more than anything, I love to watch players grow and improve as players and grow as men. And it's just so fun to be a part of it. I mean, it kept me young. It kept us young as coaches to be around that youth with enthusiasm and, just the focus to try to be the best I can be and the goal setting that these kids have. Everybody, is – I mean, I worked, that's what's so special about UCLA, all the pros. I had over 20 guys that played in the NBA out of UCLA in 10 years, I think 24 or 25. But you're talking about high-level guys that they're just so focused. And then the relationships with your staff, is really special because you're in those foxholes together. You're dealing with the pain of losing. I was reminded yesterday, I had lunch with Clay McKnight, Gary McKnight's son, and Clay worked for me as a video coordinator for 3 or 4 years at UCLA. He reminded me we lost to USC and Tim Floyd's team at Poly in 2008, Final Four year. And we had both Lorenzo Mata and Bamute sustain concussions in that game and go down. In the same game, 2 concussions in separate plays. And but he reminded me that I had the staff, there was a 1 o'clock game. We watched the tape 3 times that night. I had him there until 1 o'clock in the morning. I don't remember that, it's like been involved in so many games. But we were there, we must have watched 7 hours of that game, over and over each play. Just, because, you're just so hurt and to lose to your rival like that at home was unbelievable. But those relationships with your staff and then watching them go on, like Jamie Dixon, we worked together, for 9 years, both at NAU and actually at Santa Barbara and then at Pitt. And, I worked so hard to make sure they hired him when I left Pittsburgh. He did such a fantastic job. He's had such a great career. I have such great pride and love Jamie so much, just what he's done with his career. And, that's what's fun is when you see guys go on and have success beyond their time with you, both as players and as coaches and assistant coaches. And then obviously the relationships with fans and, the people within the department. I mean, like Doug Erickson. You and I both know Doug from UCLA. Doug is like a great friend. He's not a former player. I love Doug. Kenny Donaldson, I had lunch with yesterday. He was my I hired him as our academic guy. He's now the assistant athletic director at UCLA and oversees a number of sports. I mean, Chris Carlson, another one, was my ops guy at UCLA. He's an assistant athletic director. I mean, I love that those guys have gone on, and the people within the department there and on campus recognize what great guys these guys are and how good they are at their jobs. To me, that's so fun.
Ben, do you ever? And I've had a couple of guys that I coached that are now Division I head coaches. But if as a young Division I coach that were to call you up and say, Coach, boy, I got my great shot, I got my chance here. They just hired me. I'm excited, and they would say, hey, Coach Howland, do you have? Give me a word or two of wisdom. What would come to your mind for a young coach, first opportunity, Division I, a lot of pressure. A lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm, probably a lot of anxiousness on their part. What were some things that you might, think to say to them to try to maybe give them a little advice on the way?
Number one would be, you have to get a great staff. You're only as good as the people around you. The success I had as a head coach, I had everything to do with who was on my staff, my assistant coaches, at all the stops that I had. I mean, Jamie was, a phenomenal assistant coach and, the best. I mean, and you want guys and understanding, that you want them all to want to be head coaches and that, they want to move on with their careers and are very motivated. And then to understand that players are the most important thing. That, you can be as good a coach as you can be, but if you don't have the talent to develop and work with that's good enough to compete against your competition, you have no chance. That's what makes it so much more difficult now in this current climate. In northern Arizona, I had a 7-foot kid, Dan McClintock, who was 7 feet, 250 pounds, fastest guy on the team, second-round draft pick, Denver Nuggets. I would have never been able to keep him in today's basketball. He'd have been paid for by some big program, and you couldn't blame a kid for taking $500,000. I mean, that's what's happening now. You're seeing these kids that, at that level. So how do you move up as a young assistant at a big sky school or a Murray State when everybody's going to be poaching your players in this current climate? That kills me. I hate it. And I don't think it changes the trajectory necessarily that often of the player. I mean, if you're good enough, the NBA is so good now at evaluating talent, and I'm talking about every nook and cranny. But you have these stories like the kid last year at Tennessee they took from Northern Colorado, who's now with the Lakers. What a story! But as a young coach, I mean that's what's tough, and NIL money is a lot harder to get at the lower mid-major or low major than it is the high major. I mean, and if you don't have that, it's very difficult to compete. It's just, it really is tough. But, embrace every day, love it. I mean, you're the thing that I always love, Mark, as a coach, is we got to do what we love to do. Like I always tell players, what do you want to do when you're done playing? But the number one thing is to love what you do, because to hate work every day and not have fun at what you're doing, it would make life very difficult for me. I mean, I loved what I did, and that was the joy. I mean, and you see that like in a Coach Harrick. I mean, they loved the game. He's coaching AAU basketball years later for the Pumps. I mean, he couldn't stay away from the game. He loved it, loves it still. I mean, and that's what it's about for me, is we all grew up in the games. I'm just so grateful to have had a whole life where I got to do something I loved to do. Yeah.
Well, Ben, it's been amazing, and congratulations, man, on your career, because probably nationally underappreciated for how good you really were at every stop along the way. And so, but anyway, thank you for being on my show. It's been a lot of fun.
Hey, thank you, Mark. It was great.
Thank you, Ben.